Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Carmen Stanley is a little bit under the weather, and so we've got Mo Jackson, who's producing for us, and Mark Leake is doing audio. I've got the sniffles, so hopefully I'm not going to be coughing too much during tonight's program. Today's segment is about the global currency reset to exchange Federal Reserve notes for Treasury dollars. For people who are new to this series, the network of global corporate control is a single big conglomerate that owns and controls many companies on the capital markets and issues the world's paper currencies. Three mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology, Vitaly Glatfelder and Battiston, who proved the existence of the network of global corporate control, also call it the super entity. There is a much stronger financial group called the Global Debt Facility. The Global Debt Facility contains the world's gold reserves, silver, platinum, other precious metals, diamonds, artwork, and other treasures. Ferdinand Marcos was the lawyer who set up the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II. All the countries and royals of the world agreed to keep the assets in the Global Debt Facility secret for a 50-year period, and then at the end of that period, the finance and development ministers on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, there are 188 of them, would put these assets to use for the benefit of humanity. I am following in Marcos's footsteps. I am the overseer mandate trustee for the Global Debt Facility. The Global Debt Facility starts with Jose Rizal, who was an eye surgeon that studied ophthalmology in Germany and operated on the eyes of the Emperor of Austria. During that time, Jose Rizal had an affair with Clara Puzel, who was a staff member of the Emperor of Austria's household. Jose Rizal had a son from that union, and his name was Adolf Hitler. Jose Rizal operated on the eyes of the Emperor of Japan, and once again, an affair with a Japanese noblewoman, the Princess Kiko, produced Jose Rizal's youngest son, Tomoyuki Yamashita, who ultimately became commander of Japan's imperial forces in the Philippines. I've been told conflicting stories of who Jose Rizal's parents were, but I have not gotten convincing proof about this, so I will leave this for another time. Jose Rizal later went to the Vatican in 1898, assumed the name of Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz, and became what is called the Black Pope, or the Superior General of the Jesuits, between December 14, 1942 and September 14, 1946. It was Jose Rizal who put the assets in the Global Debt Facility. The bomb was dropped on Hiroshima because Jose Rizal refused to turn the assets in the Global Debt Facility over to the network of global corporate control. There are treasury dollars in the Global Debt Facility that Ronald Reagan printed, and these are going to be exchanged for Federal Reserve notes. I will tell you later in the program how this exchange is going to work. The treasury dollars are going to be exchanged for aurum, containing gold from the Global Debt Facility after these currencies are minted. The network of global corporate control is doing everything it knows how to try and steal the assets in the Global Debt Facility. They bought up all the media. They co-opted most, but not all, fortunately, of the lawyers. Ditto for the journalists, the accountants. How come they haven't succeeded yet if they're so strong? That is what this series is about. The network of global corporate control are pulling out all their stops and distracting you with stories in Oregon, Texas, and now I just heard something from China. How do you know that we're really in the middle of the global currency reset and that it's going to happen? We have the Department of Defense power transition model, which is 90 to 95% accurate, and it has been predicting that the United States and the rest of the world are going to end paper currencies. Paper currencies are good for the bankers, and they're a scam for everybody else. The Coalition for the Rule of Law, there's a coalition on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF, which appointed me as acting general counsel of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. This is the oldest agency of the World Bank. There are 4 others. I speak on behalf of the Board of Governors, so long as I clear things with them and work on behalf of all of humanity. During the annual meetings of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in Peru this past October, we agreed that any country would go on record in writing if they did not agree with what I do or say as Overseer Mandate Trustee. On December 18, 2015, the Development Committee of 25 Ministers of Finance informed Dr. Jim Young Kim, the World Bank President, and Vice President Sean McGrath, in charge of the World Bank's Human Resources, that their services were no longer required. The Global Debt Facility has liens, that is to say, Uniform Commercial Code financing statements, on the assets of the Federal Reserve Bank. And Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Janet Yellen, and some other persons who are interfering in the global currency reset. A couple of days ago, the Secretary of State of Maryland returned the original financing statement for commercial liens on the homes of J. Thomas Manger, Chief of Police of Montgomery County, and Kathy Lanier, Chief of Police of the District of Columbia. And I wanted to show these to you. Here they are. I'm not going to repeat the story about what Chief Manger did when I went to Chief Manger's office to talk about what would happen to the people living in Montgomery County, Maryland, if we do not get the global currency reset started. But I'll tell you, it's another dark ages. Let's summarize the power transition model that came to the World Bank from the Department of Defense. It's 90 to 95% accurate. It has been tracking events like clockwork. This model predicts how coalitions form, and the bottom line is that the United States, minus the Federal Reserve, is in a coalition on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF and has agreed to the global currency reset to replace Federal Reserve notes for the U.S. Treasury dollars in the global debt facility. I spoke with then-Senator Chuck Hagel about the power transition model in 2008. I asked Chuck Hagel to court-martial Martin Dempsey and John Reimer for treason shortly before Chuck Hagel resigned. What do you do when you receive the command to nuke a city in your own country? Vice Admiral Tim Giardina and Major General Mike Carey received this order, and they were told to do this on the 7th of October 2013. They instead dropped the bomb in the ocean 600 miles off the coast of Charleston. And there was a command to Heather Cole for a first strike nuclear attack on Russia on March 16, 2015. What she did was she intercepted that command, and that didn't happen. Instead, she was arrested. I have told John Reimer, he's the Inspector General in charge of supervising the Department of Defense personnel policies. I have told John Reimer that he is not doing his job, and that's why the Global Debt Facility has also got commercial liens on John Reimer's home. Who is behind these attempts to start World War III? The network of global corporate control is. It was the network of global corporate control that ordered the nuclear attack on Hiroshima when the Japanese would not reveal where they had hidden the gold and other treasures. I went to Japan in May 2014 and stayed there for 3 months, and I did this to do 2 things. The first thing was to let the Japanese and the embassies in Japan know that the United States military is bigger than the traitors at the top. It's the United States Armed Services that are responsible for defending Japan. The second reason I went to Japan is because the joint U.S.-Japan Committee under the Status of Forces Agreement with Japan is out of the line of command in the Department of Defense. You can read in the news how Japan is now discussing remediation of Fukushima with Russia. I discussed the power transition model with the defense attaché in Tokyo. The Knights of Malta in the Department of Defense know that it's in the United States' security interest to replace Federal Reserve notes before their engineered crash. I wrote several times to General Joseph Dunford, Jr. about the global currency reset, and I copied the New York missions and the Japanese embassies. I read my January 3rd letter to General Dunford in full last week, but let me actually, you will be seeing this in a couple of weeks. It was in the beginning of January that I read that, but I will repeat the closing paragraph again here. Pursuant to Article 5 of the 1789 Constitution of the United States, there was to be a convention to consider the applications of more than two-thirds of the state legislatures. Upon the failure of the United States Congress to convene this convention, your secret military rule is nothing other than an interregnum in the legitimate government of the United States. I informed you of the fact that you have usurped power and your military rule has no legitimacy. And a copy of this letter is on a link. I published the teleprompter, and you can get that. I'm hoping to put the tape on the internet right after this airs. General Dunford has not responded to my letter so far, but Texas's Governor Greg Abbott on the 8th of January delivered a speech calling for a convention of states to amend the United States Constitution. Governor Abbott forgot to include any acknowledgement that the Constitution of 1789 is not in effect. It's hard to propose anything to fine-tune the Constitution when it's not even governing the country. All of the governors agreed in 1937, without any authority, to sign away the property rights of the people in their states. This needs to be acknowledged and the Constitution of 1789 put into effect. I'm not so worried whether this will happen. There are enough millionaires who will find it in their interest to make it possible to exchange Federal Reserve notes above the ceiling that is going to be in effect. Excuse me. We're going to limit the amount of currency that can be exchanged for Federal Reserve notes to $1 million per person. It's going to be an exchange of dollar for dollar. And people are going to decide after the Constitution is in effect what the conditions are. There was another response that I received from General Dunford. That was via Muffin Rights, who has a very fancy website and writes books and has claimed to be legal advisor to former Pope Benedict the 16th and now Pope Francis. Muffin Rights is filing claims against the Board of Governors. I answered those claims, saying that the global debt facility has immunities and nobody, including Muffin Rights, has any standing to make any claims. She says that the 50 years of sequestration doesn't count. The agreement of all the nations and royals on earth in the bilateral Mansfield Breakthrough Successor Agreement to prevent World War III, and that agreement went into effect in 1950. She says that agreement doesn't count. She wants the United States' share of the gold in the global debt facility to go to General Dunford. She attacked me the day before yesterday. That would be on the 10th of January. But I'm ignoring that. And I'm also ignoring the 5 websites she's posted her attacks on because I had to prepare this teleprompter. And I will get to Ms. Muffin Rights later. As a matter of fact, I've been working around the clock. That's the reason for my cold. Ms. Muffin Rights calls herself a judge, but she's never heard a single case in her so-called court. General Dunford had a third response, and that was via Veterans Today. Veterans Today ran a long article claiming that the global currency reset was being run in secret. I tried to comment on the Veterans Today website, but was blocked. Some of my followers also tried to say that anyone with comments on the global currency reset was welcome to make those comments. They were blocked too. Veterans Today doesn't seem to think anyone sees through their hypocrisy. Now, before I talk about the way that the procedure will work for replacing Federal Reserve notes, I'm going to cover briefly another fire. It's no coincidence that there are so many fires to put out. The network of global corporate control is trying, like anything, to distract you from the information here that the Federal Reserve note is being replaced by United States Treasury dollars and then with local currencies and United States dollars out of gold. The network of global corporate control doesn't want to lose 100% of the income taxes which we are paying on country debt. Under the global currency reset, the scam the bankers call country debt is going to be wiped out because the Fed issued over $200 trillion in gold-denominated bonds that have been compounding interest since the 1930s, and they're now worth over $2 quadrillion. You may recall that the Board of Governors refused to authorize Wolfgang Struck's proposal to sell those bonds back to the Fed at a discount. The other fire? That's what's going on in Oregon, where the Bundys and Pete Santelli and a few other out-of-state persons have started occupying the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. And this is against the wishes of the Hammonds. You remember that this all started with a so-called peaceful demonstration because of what was happening to Dwight Hammond and his son Stephen and their cattle ranch. Dwight and Stephen Hammond both went back to jail on the 4th of January for a second sentence after they had served their first sentence. The judge ignored rules against double jeopardy. The Hammonds were convicted of arson because of having set backfires, which they then put out at no cost to anyone else. Now, Pete Santelli had been pounding the drum when truckers were demonstrating back in 2013. And what I tweeted, why isn't Huffington Post covering the real story that Vanilla ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Oregon under attack are trying to distract? United States District Judge Ann Aiken, who resentenced Dwight Hammond Jr. and his son Stephen, is not sitting in a court under Article 3 of the United States Constitution. All of these unconstitutional courts are going to end their reign of terror shortly, as martial law in the United States that started in 1861 ends in a global currency reset, and the U.S. Congress has been extending that martial law secretly behind closed doors. What is going on in Oregon has nothing to do with the Hammonds anymore. So this is now, we're going to be turning to the global currency reset. This is what I wrote to the Development Committee, which consists of 25 ministers of finance. The Development Committee represents the Board of Governors in between annual and spring meetings. First, I informed them that I was making these proposals because of the shortage of time and risk that Federal Reserve notes are going to crash before they can be replaced. And I said in my letter, the purpose of these measures is to frustrate the efforts of the network of global corporate control identified by Vitali Glatfelder and Battiston of ETH Zurich. They are trying to bring on another dark ages through quantitative easing. Successive measures in the global currency reset will be agreed transparently and peacefully in due course. In addition to discussions in the Development Committee, the United States will join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, I had already made this point in a video that Press TV filmed last year. These countries know that the United States Congress is simply in the back pocket of the network of global corporate control. They have also seen the Princeton study by Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page that we covered in a nice film clip in a previous segment. This study shows that voters have little or no influence on Congress. That's because they're just working as managers for the network of global corporate control. I told the Development Committee that United States residents are going to replace their Federal Reserve notes, and that Federal Reserve notes, which are held abroad, are going to be converted later. And this conversion may be through sales of stock in the companies owned by the network of global corporate control. For a while, Treasury dollars are going to be circulating alongside the Federal Reserve notes. It's only when the Treasury dollars are exchanged for aurum, which is currency where gold is pressed very thin and put in a plastic envelope, the excess Federal Reserve notes are going to be recalled. It's going to be up to people who use the currency to decide which currency to use. There's also going to be more and more local currencies. Next week, we're going to discuss local currencies. So how is the exchange going to work? Each resident in the United States is going to be allowed to exchange up to $1 million of Federal Reserve notes for U.S. Treasury dollars. The rules for exchanging more than $1 million are going to be decided after the United States Constitution of 1789 is back into effect, and it's going back into effect under an Article 5 convention. The way the exchange is going to work is that there'll be a form which is very similar to the voter registration form that gets filled out and submitted to the World Bank Development Committee. And in that form, people are going to put down an address where they want a certificate to be mailed to them. The certificates are going to have a grid on the back, and each time a person exchanges Federal Reserve notes for Treasury dollars, the amount that has been exchanged will be recorded on the certificate until the $1 million maximum has been reached. People will probably hold on to the Treasury dollars so that they will be able to exchange these for the aurum when the aurum become available. The simple fact that Federal Reserve notes are going to be exchanged for constitutional currency is preventing the demise of the United States economy at this time. Which financial institutions are going to be the ones to act as agents of the Development Committee? This is going to be agreed together with the counter guarantee to make sure that there's no fiddling. Next week, we're going to talk about local currencies. I also wanted to talk about something that happened just this morning, and that is that I found out that in the Philippines, you may recall that the CIA has tried to invalidate all of the paperwork that Ferdinand Marcos issued for the Global Debt Facility, and they did this relying on a statement of the International Court of Justice. That statement was in April, and I issued, as soon as I found out about it, I issued a statement saying that the International Court of Justice had no jurisdiction, that the bilateral mines field breakthrough successor agreement is very clear that the courts have no jurisdiction over these matters. And what I found out was that the people in the Philippines ignored the statement of 188 ministers of finance. So I wrote a letter to the people in the Philippines. I sent it to the embassy here in Washington, asked them to convey the message to their Minister of Finance and also to the president of their central bank, saying that the rest of the world is absolutely, these kinds of measures will bring on World War III, and that we're not having any of it, and that these statements in the government of the Philippines are null and void. That's what the lawyer for the Global Debt Facility has to do, and that's what I've done. I see that my time is up. I want to thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please send me an email to karenhudas@hotmail.com. This week we've been talking about the global currency reset and some of the ways that bankrupt network of global corporate control is trying to forestall the inevitable. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudas.